now going to talk, so this hypothetical question that I mentioned in the opening about if we decided suddenly to focus on art as the fundamental basis of our culture, what would happen, and would we be poorer and less productive and so on? I guess it would mean if instead of TED Talks being performed, by neuroscientists to vast audiences, suddenly they asked, novelists for what we should all do next. And so I wanted to turn to you, James, because you have an antithetical view on this. You've written about how there's a lot of bad art around. So I wonder if we were being legislated by really bad artists, that might not be a good idea. There's a slight notion in this that art would fundamentally be, lustrous and, high-minded, but it could just be a lot of really, really terrible art, couldn't it?
Well, if the issue is, whether we should be led more by artists at the moment, makes me think back to my favourite idea from Aristotle, his idea of the doctrine of the mean. And he says, if you've got a problem with cowardice, you aim to be recklessly brave. Okay, so if you're a bit chicken, you aim to be just absolutely reckless, and you'll probably end up roughly in the right place. Okay, if you're a miser, right, you just aim to give away all of your money, and hopefully you'll end up in roughly the right place. Well, the kind of society we are in at the moment, I think we should aim to be completely led by artists, just 100%. Okay. And maybe because this is the world which is led by business and science, in which there are multi-billionaires who, individuals who have more money than an entire nation of people. I do not see that we're ever going to be able to get to a stage where art is endangering our industry and people's desire to go out and make huge amounts of money. We are so massively away from that. So, in accordance with the doctrine of the mean, I'd say, let's go for a lot more artistic influence on society. And what do I actually think that's important? Because we're being, our lives are being changed by technology and technological development, and I think a lot of people are not engaged with that process, and they buy into new technologies which change our lives because it's fun, and it's produced because people know it will sell, and that's kind of how our future is being determined. The consumers saying it's fun, and the people producing it saying that will sell. If we had a little bit more artistic engagement with our ideas and our facts and our science and our philosophy, then a bit more like Parmenides going on through the sky on his chariot, maybe people would get a bit more interested in these sort of things, and people, you could have some kind of democracy, some kind of democratic element enter into the process of technological development. That's why I think it's important to get art involved, because it engages people, and I think there's this disengagement. We just take what's given to us by people working behind the scenes.
Izzy, during the pandemic, I was thinking as someone who works within performance, and it seemed that people did have a real craving for then those, performances of plays online, and there was that yearning for, even as we were following the science and all of that, there was a yearning for something artistic within that. Was that something you noticed in your own field?
Yes, and I think there's definitely a place for that to carry on, because there are people who can't leave the house for various reasons, not to do with COVID, and they were able to watch a comedy and various debates like this and plays and so on from their own homes, and I think it's brilliant. I think it should carry on. But performing stand-up on Zoom, looking at a massive version of your own face sometimes, doing your material sometimes to silence, or the chat function being open and seeing people discuss what they were going to do next while you were on stage was odd, discombobulating. However, it was quite interesting to go through as a performer and a writer, and the pandemic did force us to think differently about how we create art and what we do, and even how we write. I was writing a book and I wrote differently because I couldn't see people. But I suppose when you engage, I think it's difficult not to engage with art. So if we did replace all the TED Talks with some kind of art, even if it wasn't very good art, even if it was back-to-back episodes of Married at First Sight, I still think that would generate a response. And even if you're talking about, why didn't that relationship work, and how does that reflect on my relationship, it's different from watching something that you feel very detached from. But it's interesting, because what is bad, you can get, if we did say everything has to be art now, you'd get such a wide variety of things and such a wide variety of quality, and there'd be disagreements about what was good and what was bad. Whereas science feels more cut and dried. What is bad science? It's black and white, isn't it? So it can't be it shouldn't be factual inaccuracies. It should be a thing that's not relevant to society. But I think definitely we should replace everything with art. And I think technology is, I think it's very damaging the way that we consume facts, and that if they could be communicated through art, we'd think about the way we form opinions differently and discuss our opinions differently and perhaps come to different conclusions. But the way, especially with social media, that things are presented to us, I think it feels cold and you're disengaged. And I think that's the way that things become more polarised as well.
Yes. I mean, Janne, do you think if Sage had nothing but artists and, novelists on it instead of, scientists and behavioural scientists, what on earth would have happened? I mean,
what had, sorry?
If Sage, the kind of advisory board that was advising the government, the scientific advisory group, which may, constantly advise the government during the pandemic, just finishing off on the pandemic as an example, I guess. Do you think that would have been totally different running of the pandemic if we'd had artists?
I think quite a lot of things would have been different, because, what artists have to do if they're any good, and that's what it's all, is to understand, what goes on in people at a deeper level and try to communicate that. That really good art is always a letter from the soul of the artist to the soul of the recipient, and that's no matter what kind of art we talk about. But it takes a little bit more time than that standard conversation that's had in politics or the everyday debate. But what I don't understand is, in a lot of schools, I'm not quite sure how it is here in England, but in Denmark, morning song is considered if you want to lift the kids. But why don't every parliamentary session not start with the reading of a poem? It sets the tone totally different, that you have just, in a way, every meeting in any business should start with the reading of a poem, because it forces every participant to just reach themselves. Who are they really as human beings, not as functions of a capitalist system that needs to make money, or a voting system that needs to sell some idea that they can get more votes and more power. It's all that idea of selling goes away if you start having to reach your deeper human self. And from there, I believe we take better decisions. Because it's not that the poet or the writer or artist themselves take better decisions or give better advices. History shows many artists, unfortunately, have been fascists, Hamsun, a Nazi and whatever, but they knew how to reach the soul. And when we reach the soul, we take better decisions.
So just to try and complicate this distinction between art and science a little, Paul, I was thinking what you said earlier about the fog, and so you create a notion of the fog, and the sort of observer then creates a certain version of what is seen. And I guess science has reached that revelation in some fields, hasn't it, in the quantum realm, and the idea that the observer affects what's being observed. And so this kind of maybe form a distinction between the world and the individual may not be so polarized in art and science. Could that be one way where we're not just dividing them utterly?
I don't think they may not be divided. They may not be divided. I do think that, as we read anything, to go back to what I was saying earlier, we're constantly testing each word, each sentence with our own lived experience, to use a phrase that's much used these days, including when we meet the word lemon in a work of literature, as we do, by the way, in James Joyce's Ulysses. A lemon is a central component, resonating in various ways. We test it against what we know ourselves a lemon to be, and then, with any luck, actually, we're pushed to a place where we did not expect to be, and that may not absolutely square up with the facts. But I think there is a relationship between the two. And we can't get to B without having some sense of A. I hope that doesn't sound too gnomic, but we have to have familiarity, acceptance of a shared notion before we begin to play with it. So, various things were coming to mind there, and as I said, no, I'm not at all sure which side I'm on. I was interested, by the way, in the notion of the good poem. Who determines what a good poem is? That's going to be a tough job. That's going to be a job for the poetry czar, who will have quite a large office somewhere, right? Because I love the idea of starting the day with a poem. I do love that idea. I love the idea of every newspaper in this country, just to stick with this country for the moment, should be carrying a poem every day, right? One of the reasons why that is the case is that it would actually diminish the notion that art is something strange, mysterious, something that we can't all partake of in the way that we might actually partake of particle physics in a strange way. And for some reason, we think we might be able to understand quarks better than we might James Joyce, that they're more intelligible in some strange way, though the word quark, as you know, it derives from James Joyce. There's this notion that the sciences are indeed more involved with facts, which is simply not the case. And I would love more scientists to acknowledge that they are involved themselves in surmises, and that in fact they would honour the creative aspect of science, right? And notions of what, I think there was a debate earlier on at 12, I didn't get to it, I'm afraid, about whether or not the notion of the multiverse is a construct, is actually something that belongs more in the realm of the poem than it might in the realm of what? The abacus? I don't know.
Yeah, great. Let's turn now to where we think culture's going, which we've kind of touched on.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.